welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Debbie, thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited because I have known about this book for quite a while. And in fact, last time you were on the podcast, I knew it was coming and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for that book. And now it's finally here. So first of all, congratulations on, as we're recording this, you're approaching the finish line.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have it out in the world. And I'm so honored that people are reading it and talking about it. And I can't wait to just hear your questions and, start discussions.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to actually say the name of your book up front, and then I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your why for putting it out into the world. So your brand new book is called The Neurodivergent Learner, a new approach to your child's success in the classroom and beyond. Mm-hmm. And again, when I heard you were writing this like a year or two ago, I was like, oh, I'm so glad we need this book. So tell us about why you felt so strongly about getting this out into the world.
Well, as a mom of neurodivergent boys, and then as a child psychologist and former school psychologist, I had lived all these different parallel journeys, right? As a clinician, as a parent. But then I started working with teachers more, working with parents more. And there's such a disconnect between mental health and education when it comes to neurodivergent learners. It's like, it truly is a Venn diagram. You cannot just know about education and teach them, or know about mental health and treat them. It is a Venn diagram, I feel like, between the medical, the educational, and the developmental, which is different from the medical. Because as a psychologist, I'm trained on human learning development. And so I see it from that lens. And then I see how, things interfere with that when it comes to autism and ADHD and learning disabilities. And then there's just the environmental stuff that happens with anxiety and family dynamics and the stress on schools all over the world for different reasons. So none of this occurs in a vacuum, but I feel like parents go to teachers, parents go to therapists, parents go to each other, right? And they never get that rounded approach to, but how do I help this child learn? And I wanted to make sure that the book was part for advocating within an educational setting, but also I really want all the readers to come away with the idea, because half the book talks about learning outside of the classroom. So the idea that learning is lifelong, can happen anywhere. We culturally put so much emphasis on achievement. And that's the new approach that I'm coming to with this book, is it's not all about achievement. And that's true for everyone, but it is so true for our kids who have so many gifts to share, and it may not be able to be measured in achievement.
Yeah. And, listeners, you guys should go back and listen to our last conversation when Emily was on the show. I'll put it in the show notes page, because that's what we talked about, redefining success. And I think that's such an important piece of this conversation. And I love this idea of being a lifelong learner. That did jump out at me too, as I was reading the book, that this isn't just a book about how to get your kid through the system. I mean, there's so much practical insight in there about how to navigate traditional educational systems, but you're looking at kind of the child as a whole in a way I wasn't expecting, that I really loved.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there are many, many books, from parents' perspectives, from teachers' perspectives, from advocates who work within the IEP system in the States about how to get your child access, all those logistics, but not one that puts it together and helps parents really know how to balance their energy. Because if you put all your energy, you can put all your energy into the IEP, or all your energy into the doctor's appointments, or all your energy into behavior management. And many times you are doing all of those things. But to know when to be concerned and when to step back and when to let the teacher and the child figure it out, that's how we're going to stay sane as parents, right? And how we can build a village beyond just us.
Yeah. How did you go about organizing the book and kind of thinking about putting it together? Because, when you're writing a book, you're starting with a blank slate. It can be anything, which is both both the beautiful thing and the really
and the
challenging
terrifying thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious to hear more about your process as you started to shape it.
I probably spent more time thinking about this book than actually writing it. That is just how my brain works. I think about things for a very long time. I outline things, I talk about things, and then I'm ready. But I decided that I wanted there to be science, I wanted there to be strategies, and I wanted there to be stories. And as a trained school psychologist, honestly, it kind of takes the form of how I was trained to write a psychoeducational report. You write the background and the story of a child, and then you go into the science and the data of like, this is what the testing shows. And then you go into the recommendations of this is what will help this child. And I think that's ingrained in me a little bit of, that story arc of telling. I always have thought about, and this is probably why I am so excited to write a book and no longer do psychoeducational testing, but I've always thought of psychoeducational reports like a story of that child, like telling the story of that child. And so when I thought about each chapter, I knew that I needed there to be just a fundamental basic understanding of the nervous system. So that's where I started, because everything in the book is framed out from understanding the autonomic nervous system and understanding that you have to feel safe, then you have to feel connected, and then you have to feel capable. And then we sprinkle the strategies on top. Right. And so the first part of the book is feeling safe in the building and with the relationships and with the curriculum, and then feeling motivated, and then going into what's harder about school, which is mainly the hot topics in part 2 are homework, testing, and friendships. Yeah. And those are the things that traditionally I see so much in my psychology practice that really interfere, not always interfere with learning, but disrupt it, right? Mm-hmm. They disrupt the flow of learning and can sometimes make it harder. And then the third section is all about empowering, self-advocating, learning through interests. There's a chapter in there on anxiety that's called Hold On, the School is Calling, which everyone I know can relate to.
Feeling the cortisol run through my body as you say
right,
that.
Right. And I have, had that call too. So I understand what that feels like and how to respond to that. So every chapter starts with a story, followed by the science, followed by recommendations. And then at the end of every chapter, I give parents an email script to communicate with a teacher. Because I would say one of the number one questions I get from parents, not wanting to overwhelm teachers, but also not wanting to just let it go and let their kid fend for themselves, right? And this book is predominantly for entering elementary through about early middle school. So we're advocating for our kids. We're still not expecting them necessarily to speak up. I hope there's a follow-up book that talks about tweens and teens and young adults, but we'll get there later. But I have parents who say, well, what do I say? I don't want to overwhelm the teacher. I don't want to tell them how to do their job. So I hope those email scripts are helpful to just get you started on what to say to reach out, because what I worry about is some parents won't reach out at all because they're worried about, stepping on teachers' toes. And teachers want our information. They want our collaboration. They want our teamwork. And our kids benefit when we share stories from home.
Yeah, I love that you included that. I mean, I would just say, full disclosure, listeners, I did get to read Emily's book in advance, and I provided a blurb for it, and I'm going to share the blurb that I wrote.
I'd love
so you guys can hear how it struck me. I said, if this book had only existed, it was everything I needed as the parent of a complex neurodivergent 2E kid who was absolutely not thriving in school as a young kid. It didn't exist, and now it does. This is the unedited version, by the way. I cleaned it up when I sent it to you. But these are my raw thoughts on it. And it's going to help so many families at the start of this journey imagine what can happen when we prevent a whole generation of neurodivergent kids to not be traumatized by their school experience. And as the parent of a 21-year-old, and I just think it really took me back to those years of just floundering and just feeling like we were speaking different languages, and I just could not get through what I was feeling and the way I wanted my child to be seen, and then what was happening at the school level with behaviors and other things. And I just felt like we were all of these stakeholders were living in completely different universes.
Yeah. And when my oldest son, who's 18, a senior now, was 4 years old, was when he was diagnosed and when we started therapies and the IEP process, I remember thinking, this is what I do for my job. Like I know what they're saying in these meetings. And my comparison to this was watching the parallel experience of my husband and me. So we were both, in these meetings, and he had no idea all this language they were using, right? And I understood all the language. I had, had a PhD in school psychology. I'd been a school psychologist for 5 years already. But that did not protect me from the emotional experience of sitting there talking about really hard things about how my kid couldn't handle the classroom. We were going to need to change schools because he couldn't handle it. Going in thinking it was going to be okay, and it very much was not okay. Like really unexpected moments in early elementary school that were just, we just didn't see coming, even though I do what I do. So I also want to name that for parents. Like, it's not because you don't know enough. Like, knowing enough helps because it helps you feel confident and competent in these meetings, but no one gets away from this emotionally. And we have to really share our stories and connect with each other and recognize just as one day at a time. It's like one day at a time. And then I think I say somewhere in the book, because I've said this for years, one school year at a time. I started saying that a long time ago, the very beginning of my son's journey. Let's just do the next best thing for the next school year.
Totally. Yeah. There's very little long-term planning. There's very few of us who kind of start a K through 8 school and we just kind of move on through that system without any hiccups.
So wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, I can't imagine what that would be like. I'd love to go back to something, as you were walking us through the different parts of the book, you talked about safety at school, and you write about building a school family as establishing felt safety. And I'm just wondering if you could go into that in a little more detail. What does that actually mean? And how can we as parents really kind of foster that kind of environment for our kids at school?
Yeah, I think in elementary school especially, we think about just the teacher, the classroom teacher. And does my kid have a good teacher, not good teacher? Do they get it? Do they not get it? And we put a lot of weight on that person. And let me tell you, a good teacher fit will make the school year. That is true. Mm-hmm. However, there are relationships all over that building, as well as sometimes through transportation or through after school care, before school care, throughout your child's day, that can help school feel safer for them. So think about your child's day from their perspective, from the moment they leave the home until they return home. And who are the people that they interact with? Is there a bus driver? Is there a 5th grader at carpool getting them out of the car? Is there, someone on lunch duty they connect with or don't connect with? Who are the people in the hallways? Is there a certain teacher that's not even their classroom teacher that knows a lot about their special interest? Is there an elective teacher, or we call them specials here, like music, PE, art, dance, or one of those teachers that's not a classroom teacher, but your child is always feeling safe and connected with them? Those are going to become the family at school. And when you hit a rough patch with your child, or if there's a staff member who's not connecting, we want to be able to say, you know what, my kid always talks about the art teacher and how that person makes them laugh. I would love to hear more about that. And usually the art teacher does not come to an IEP meeting. And usually we don't have much interaction with these smaller roles. Or it might be, someone that our kid has mentioned and we're like, who is this kid named Johnny? My kid keeps saying something about him. And we can hopefully get more information about what's going well, because I talk about this in the book. The education system is very much that the special education system is very much set up similar to the medical model, where we have a problem and we try to fix it and no news is good news. Well, we can prevent so many things from happening if we think about this from a strengths-based approach and think, where is my kid laughing? Where are they not resistant at all to going? Where do I never hear about a problem? And what's going on in those environments? Is it the time of day? Is it the person? Is it the topic? What is happening that's working, and how can we expand it out from there? Because those are where the solutions are.
Yeah, it makes sense. And just having that one anchor, I'm thinking about the kids who, go have lunch in the art room because the art teacher really gets them, and it's like a safe haven for them. So I really like that concept. So obviously feeling safe at school is a sign of a good school fit, or that we have kind of those key people. What are some of the other criteria that you would say for a good school fit? I mean, this is something that comes up a lot, especially as parents are entering early elementary. It's like, how much should I say about what's going on? I don't want my kid to have a target on their back. And, there's a lot of kind of like, let's kind of on a wing and a prayer, let's just, roll the dice and hope that it's a good fit.
See how it goes.
Yeah. And so, obviously I think that doesn't work for a lot of us. And so really knowing what are we looking for, and what would be signs that this is a good school fit for our kids versus, this isn't a safe environment.
This is when I actually want to challenge parents to get out of their head a little bit and get into their body when they are touring schools. And what I mean by this is, your child has conditioned you to know what startles them, to know what makes them laugh, to know what's going to be loud for them or overwhelming for them. I mean, how many of us think, like, when a loud motorcycle goes by, I know I'm sometimes, it makes me startle, and then I'm really glad my kid's not with me because I know that would overwhelm him, or something, like thoughts like that. And so your child really well. So think about, when you're walking through a school, how you think your child would respond from a sensory perspective. Because number one, we have to feel sensory safe before we even get to the relationships. And so will they be able to navigate the building, the lights, the crowds, the noise? Are there things about the building they will love? The way it's mapped out? Are there room numbers that they love to track? Maps and room numbers and things like that. Think through how you think your child will respond, which is not something a lot of parents think about. They think about the stats of the school, the achievement of the school. And I often will tell parents, if you Google a school and look for test scores, that tells you 0% about the relationships in that building and 0% about the sensory experience of that building. And so you have to get in there, meet the people, walk around, feel the space, and truly trust your gut on if you felt overwhelmed. Now, it's possible too, for if you are more overwhelmed. I've got my youngest, I would say I'm more sensitive than my youngest, and he's just like full steam ahead, fast as can be everywhere. He needs a lot of movement. And so I know that about him, and I'm going to see things. I'm like, oh, he would love that. If you're walking through a school and you're like, oh, they would love this, that's a great sign, because there's got to be stuff they love, because there's going to be stuff that's hard in any school.
Yeah.
And there's no best school. There's only the school that's right for your kid. And the choice you make now may not be the choice you make 5 years from now, because you haven't met that kid yet. Yeah. I work with kids over time, so I see them grow up, and kids achieve things we never thought in our mind that would happen. This is true of my own kids. I'm like, it was partly protective, I'm sure, that I was like, I'm just going to take this one school year at a time. But it's not lost on me that this book is coming out at a few months later, actually, than my oldest is graduating from high school. Wow. And I'm like, this is the year of, like, I can't believe this is happening, because thinking forward, it's just not something I did. I was just in the moment trying to do the next best thing for him, which is what you're doing when you're picking a school.
Yeah. I know that feeling too. Like, oh, I didn't know we were going to get here. So that's pretty cool that this is converging. This book coming out is converging with that milestone.
Yeah.
It's very cool. So, okay. So in terms of red flags for a school not fitting, I think this is, again, something I hear about all the time. It's like parents are always trying to find, the allies at school, or, we can kind of, if we notice our kids are getting more and more dysregulated, but we still want to work with the school, or we're not ready to give up. Like, I'll just say for me, for one of the schools that we left, it was definitely a teacher situation that didn't feel safe. It felt very actually unsafe, emotionally unsafe for my child to be in that environment. But are there any other kind of big things that you would want parents to pay attention to kind of consider, okay, maybe it's time to pivot here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, before I answer this, I also want to say it's a privilege to be able to change schools. There are absolutely some parents, most parents that I talk to, they're going to go to their neighborhood public school, and you will be negotiating, collaborating about services with the people that you got. Yep. And so that's just reality for many people. But I write some in the book about, all types of strategies for collaboration. But if you have the choice, in public schools, you and the staff are going to be on the same page of trying to figure out, well, is this child in the right, placement for services? Do they need more support if it's not going well? So that's one avenue. The other avenue is just like you're feeling stuck on, this is just the way the school is. Like, it's too big. Like, you can't change the size of a school. The curriculum's moving too fast. And so if you're in a private school, they don't have to change the curriculum for you. If you're in a public school, an IEP, of course, can slow down that pacing of curriculum. But what I would say is the biggest red flag is definitely if you don't feel safe, if your child doesn't feel safe, if the school has stopped collaborating with you. Like, if you feel like they're out of ideas, if you, because problems are going to happen, and you could have a whole school year that's awful, as long as you feel like you have a team and you're working on it and you're collaborating. Sometimes it does just take time for kids to mature, but it's if you feel like they've stopped working on it, basically. Mm-hmm. And then if your child is experiencing behaviors that are causing them to not be able to learn, or their classmates to not be able to learn, that's not sustainable, right? Yeah. For either of them or for anyone. Because, many times what happens is there's social blowback from that, right? So kids who have big behaviors, we have tons of compassion for them, and we can be as neuroaffirming as possible, but their peers are going to be really hesitant to socialize or be close to them, because they're then feeling scared of the behavior and not fully being able to understand our child. So those are some red flags to look for.
That is a really hard situation to be in. So let's talk for a few minutes about positive reinforcement plans or behavioral systems. You talk about this in the book, these external motivation drivers. And I'm just curious to know your thoughts. And you describe them in the book, but I'd like to share them with listeners for when they can be helpful. What do schools get wrong, and how can we work with those systems? Because there's just a lot of confusion around how and when to use these and if they're effective.
So PBIS is what we call these in the States. And these systems are school-wide behavior systems that are meant to motivate kids to be kind, to do their work, to show up as good citizens of the school. It feels like they're good ideas, right? They're good ideas. They're if they're doable for the child, it's great to hold everyone accountable. However, when they become a problem is when a child doesn't have the skills to meet the expectations, right? So if we really truly think about a behavioral expectation to be kind to everyone, and then you don't earn a ticket when you're not kind to everyone, well, if you have explosive emotional moments due to ADHD, or someone interrupts your work plan and you're very rigid because you're autistic, there may be some moments where you're not kind to people, and it's part of your disability. And so we have to think broader in the sense of, I think about it in the sense of tiers. So like there's going to be a swath of kids that absolutely can meet the expectations of a school-wide behavior program. PBIS is what it's called in most public schools in the States, and then private schools can have similar things that have different names. So there's a swath of kids that can do it. That's great for them. They'll hold them to those expectations. And then there are kids that are going to be able to meet those expectations with support. So that may mean that they're going to need to be prompted to be kind, or they're going to need to be prompted to turn all their work in. They're going to need strategies, right? And then there's probably a category of kids who cannot meet those goals because they don't have those skills yet. And we don't want them to be penalized because they don't have the skills. So where this comes from in talking about motivation is you can't be motivated to do something that you aren't capable of doing. So it's like not giving a kid a ticket to run a race because he broke his leg. Right. So we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't say you're not invited to the party because you didn't run the race because your leg is broken, you know? Mm-hmm. And so when you put it in physical terms like that, it feels obvious, but it's harder, I think, too, with when we talk about mood and social interactions, because when you have a broken leg, it doesn't hurt anybody's feelings, right? But if you have explosive emotions, you might hurt someone's feelings. So it is more complicated than physical, but the analogy still stands as like, let's talk about capability, right? And so what I would suggest, and what I've consulted with teachers on, is let's make individualized goals for that kid so they can earn a ticket for, being able to apologize if that's the skill they're working on, being able to check in with a friend that they may have said something hurtful to, and that's how they're earning things. I don't love the idea of external motivation all the time. However, when these systems are so ingrained, it becomes pretty obvious if you're the kid that didn't earn a ticket. So it becomes more than just, an external motivated, and it's like a culture, right? So we want to help all kids work towards improving whatever the skill is that they're working on. And for some kids, the goals just have to be individualized, just like with academics.
Yeah, right. And done so in a way that doesn't guilt or shame anyone for not being able to meet. That's right. Why that individualized approach is so important.
Right. Yeah. Because what will happen is, you didn't get to go to the pizza party on Friday because you didn't earn a ticket, and it happens every Friday, and then a child gets defeated. I'm so dumb because I have ADHD because I can't earn a ticket. And they're probably, incredibly intelligent and confused why they can be so intelligent and never remember to turn their work in if that's the goal. Mm-hmm. And so we just need to find either another goal, or we need to scaffold that goal for them, mm-hmm. or support that goal with a strategy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's doable.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Okay. I want to pivot and talk about homework for a little bit. I took a lot of notes on homework. You have a whole chapter on it. And I really liked your take on how you think about homework in terms of these 2 steps, which were the learning understands the concept or skill, and then the learner is motivated to improve their skill. So this that's really what homework's about. And I think there's a lot of confusion, right, about maybe on the part of school, and then parents can get really caught up in the homework nagging and all of those things. So could you unpack kind of your general thoughts about homework, and then we'll go a little deeper into that.
Yeah, I think about homework as learning how to be an independent worker. If I could rebrand homework, I would say learning how to work alone, right? And so at school, they may work in groups. They're working with supervision, so someone's keeping them on task. They may have a friend that is working with them, and as a partner. But what homework truly is, like, think about what we do in all of our work as adults. We have to focus on let's say a project or something we're writing. We have those executive functioning skills because of the homework that we did, because of the independent work that we were taught to do over time. Now, the fact that it happens at home is what's problematic, right? Because you can become an independent worker when it comes to things like executive functioning or writing, reading, creating projects, things like that, anywhere. You don't have to be at home. Where it becomes problematic is that when you have a neurodivergent learner, most parents are not special education teachers. They don't have the expertise to help walk kids through homework that is really difficult for them. And so this chapter is full of strategies on how to scaffold homework, make systems for homework, make it visual, all those things. But what it comes down to is the purpose of homework is to help our kids learn how to be independent workers, and then think about where do we want to teach them to expand those skills, because we're going to notice what they're motivated by, what they're not motivated by. And there is some benefit in doing work that's boring, right? Mm-hmm. We have to do that in life, whether it's chores, whether it is just mundane things that we do. We have to get used to that and get comfortable with that. But there's a limit to the benefits of homework. And I talk a lot about the research behind this. And we have a lot of research. And this chapter in particular, I felt like, wow, we have so much research that we are not listening to. We are not implementing this. I mean, the studies go back to the late 80s, where we know that homework is effective for about 1 to 2 hours a night for high schoolers. And then after that, it loses its benefit because they lose sleep. And then for younger grades, it's kind of a take it or leave it thing based on if they're interested, if they're motivated to do it. So I do feel like elementary schools are getting on board with, let's just read every night. Let's read and play. Middle schools are my beef right now, because middle schools are still trying to be high schools, but these kids' executive functioning is not developed. So middle school is a whole cluster of executive functioning lift for these kids who are very much behind in executive functioning, especially if they're neurodivergent learners. We're trying to put high school expectations on executive functioning skills of maybe a third or fourth grader, because they're generally a few years behind if they have ADHD. So when we think about things like that, and parents are like, oh my gosh, why is middle school so hard? You're not dreaming it. It's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in that chapter, you broke down 17 steps of doing a homework assignment. Yes. And it was just so powerful to see it laid out like that. It's not just sitting down and doing homework. There's so many skills involved there, and each one probably needs to be developed and paid attention to. So I really appreciated that. And you offered some great strategies, like if homework is a sticking point, like consider having the child only do homework in their preferred subjects first, right? So they're already kind of bought in, considering creative ways for your child to show what she knows, as opposed to, whatever the expectation is across the board for all students. Do you have any suggestions for parents who are feeling like the homework demands are crushing their kids and just creating so much stress for their families? Are there any best practices for how to talk to the school about that?
Yeah. I mean, when I talked with teachers, this is the one chapter I talked more with teachers than other chapters. They want to know if homework is overwhelming for your child. And they don't want to be causing more stress at home, because that's just going to lead into a cycle of, I hate school, I don't want to be here, especially with the teacher being the one that's assigning it, right? And so when I talk to, specifically in the book, I mentioned a conversation from a third grade teacher of letting them know, I think I have an email script at the end of that chapter, letting them know, like, this is what it looks like at our kitchen table. And I'm curious what it looks like at school, because we have to get down to, is it the time of day? It truly could just be that. Like, your kid is exhausted and they have mastered this skill at school, and the teacher had no idea that it was so rough at home because they're just out of stamina. And the teacher may say, oh, they can totally do this independently in the classroom. Don't even worry about that at home. Because when we get down to, like, what is the purpose of doing this at home? Well, if the purpose of this is either extra practice, then as the parent, you're like, I don't think I'm the one to help with this, because I don't know how to teach them this math, basically past like 4th or 5th grade, right? We start to get like, oh, I don't know. Even though we all did math for so long in school, I didn't remember any of it. And then helping figure out, is it time of day? Is it because they haven't mastered the concept? I truly think that we shouldn't be sending homework home if they haven't mastered the concept. That's something that should, I think, be worked on more with a teacher who knows how to teach that concept, and this is for our learners, so for neurodivergent learners, because it doesn't make sense that you would be able to independently work on something that you don't fully understand. So if it's not yet mastered, let's not, or not close to being mastered, let's talk to the teacher about, can we get a little closer to mastery, so that we want to get to the point where you're just sitting next to your child and you're supporting their executive functioning, but you're not supporting the content learning.
Right.
But there are going to be times where you do need to support the content learning, because that, I mean, everyone's getting assigned homework right now. But yeah. I think bigger picture, I do think we could do less homework and but be happier, playful, connected families.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. I know the struggle is real, the stress around homework.
Because the struggle is real.
It triggers so much anxiety in parents, especially as our kids get older and the stakes seem higher. And it's like our priority should always be staying connected, deeply connected with our kids. And so, thinking about homework being the thing that and screen time being the thing that kind of creates so much disconnect. So, all right, there's so many more things we could go into. I'm going to just ask you about one more chapter and then we'll wrap up. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of social lives in school? So you have a whole chapter on friendships, which I really appreciated. We know that friendships and the social lives of neurodivergent kids can be really complex. So yeah, I just would love if you could kind of talk about why that was so important to include and just some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about making friends and keeping friends, which are two different skills, right? And so depending on your child, you may have one or the other concerns for them, or both. And generally speaking, it's a little bit harder for autistic learners to make friends. And then many times ADHD learners, if they're very, very social, will make a lot of friends and then can sometimes overwhelm them and have trouble keeping those friends. So when you have a neurodivergent learner in an academic setting, of course, every kid is going to be unique. There are going to be some kids that don't have any learning issues. They just have executive functioning weaknesses impacting their ability to learn. So at elementary and middle school levels, this often will look like kids never study. They just show up and listen and they understand everything and they don't really have any academic challenges. Whereas a child with a learning disability is going to really struggle in school and need to, work a lot harder academically. And so you may have a child that's struggling academically and or socially. But when we think about the social learning of our kids, we really need to understand how much that impacts them as a whole child, right? Because if you are doing great in your academics and you've never hit a snag, like you're an intelligent let's say an intelligent ADHDer that is just, all of a sudden losing all their friends, that's like totally confusing. Why is this happening? But let's say you are a child with a learning disability and school is really hard for you, but socially it's going really well. That is like your spotlight of the day, right? So we need to think about social learning as just another area of learning and connection for our kids. And we never talk about social skills in terms of achievement, and we shouldn't. I'm glad we don't. But I think there is this idea, we talked about this on the last podcast as well, there is this idea of parents being worried that their child doesn't have friends or that their child doesn't have enough friends, or especially the story I share in the book is the child who is wandering on the playground and being worried. So there is this idea of social success. It may not be achievement, but it's like they're not okay socially, I'm giving air quotes with okay, because they're wandering on the playground or they only have one friend. What we really want to think about in terms of social success is social satisfaction. And that comes from the child's perspective. Are they satisfied with their interactions? And what we want to look for is sometimes kids wander around on the playground because they're decompressing from being in a room that's buzzing with energy and noises and people talking, and they are fine as can be walking around on that playground. So we don't need to worry about them. Where we should be concerned is with loneliness. If our child is lonely, if they're feeling a lack of connection, if they're feeling rejection, that is when we do want to get involved and try to connect them with other kids who share their interests. And I go all into talking about how that may not be a same age peer. You know, when we lead kids into social connections through interests, especially our kids that have a wide array of interests, it may not be someone their same age. So we've got to think beyond the classroom and the playground to find these connections and to find other just social satisfaction moments for them.
Yeah. And I love that reframing of social satisfaction. I think that's just such a great way to think about it. It's so individual. And it comes back to our own worries and fears as parents if this doesn't look the way we thought it would look. There's one other thing I just want to point out that I just so appreciated. You have, as you said at the very beginning, you have stories from families and clients that bring, the material to life, but you also have quotes from kids about their lived experience peppered throughout the book. And I loved that so much. Like just it's just unusual and rare to get to hear from a 9-year-old about what this actually feels like. How did you go about gathering those?
Yeah, so if you follow me on Substack or social media, you know that I put out like an all call about 6 months ago that was just a Google form that was like, hey, you want to be a part of my book? Here's a Google form to fill out. And I did one for adults, like lived experience for neurodivergent adults who had memories of schooling, and for parents, and then also for kids. And the kids' quotes are amazing. And some of them wanted to use their real names. Some of them wanted to change their names. But even my publisher would ask questions, or my editor would ask questions about like, did an 11-year-old really say this? And I'm like, yes, this is a neurodivergent 11-year-old. And I don't know this child. Like it's because I only asked for first names and age. Like, I don't even know where anybody lives. I mean, they could live in another country, but I was like, I could absolutely hear a neurodivergent child saying this about school. And that's just because I had a different lived experience than my editor did. And she was like, okay, as long as that feels real, but the vocabulary they used, sometimes the way they described things they noticed in their neighborhood or things that bothered them in the school building was, it was a part of the book that I really wanted to include. And I was so grateful for the parents who of course said like, hey, do you want to answer this question? And I'll type what you say. And then, and for them trusting me with that information.
Yeah, no, I really appreciated that. And of course I could hear all the kids' voices in saying that because this is who these kids are, right? They are deep thinkers and they know what they know and they know what they like. And are usually pretty bold in expressing that. So, okay, we're going to wrap up. There's so much more we could get into, but again, going back to what I said in the very beginning, when I shared my blurb, like I really feel like this is the kind of book that any parent who is navigating having a young neurodivergent kid and is entering the school system or is struggling in the school system, like this is the book that will help them know how to best not just navigate those systems, but also zoom out and understand what really matters here and how can we kind of create a better experience overall for our children. So it again is called The Neurodivergent Learner, a new approach to your child's success in the classroom and beyond. And I don't know, is there anything that we didn't touch upon that you like would want to make sure listeners are aware of in terms of thinking about this?
I would just add that, as I wrote this book, there was a theme throughout that reminded me of this dance that I've always had with especially my older son, sometimes with my younger son, but also with clients when I talk with parents is, there's no one way to do this. There's no right or wrong way. It is a relationship. It's dynamic. It's fluid. And there'll be push and pull throughout the years, but it's just following the joy and the beauty of your kids' interest and what lights them up and following that. And that's, that's what kept me coming back to the computer. I've kept coming back to writing and finishing this and getting all of this into one book that could extend beyond my clinical work.
Well, it's wonderful. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much.
And now also knowing that you are already thinking about a part 2 for older students is great to know. So we'll keep an eye out for that when you come up for air, because I know launching a book is a lot of work. But Emily, thank you as always. Just grateful for you in the world and the work that you do and the way that you support not just families, but you are really doing so much work in schools themselves to help school systems kind of understand who our kids are. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm so grateful for your work, Debbie. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.